3 horrifying true New Year's Eve horror stories. New Year's Eve intruder. It was New Year's Eve, December 31st, when my friend Alex called me with a favor. He needed someone to watch his dog, Bailey, for the weekend while he went out of town. Alex had snagged some last-minute tickets to a big New Year's bash, and his regular dog sitter was unavailable. I wasn't much for parties anymore, so I agreed. At 35, a quiet night seemed more appealing than cramming into a crowded bar or shouting over music. Plus, the extra cash wouldn't hurt. Alex stopped by my apartment early Saturday morning to drop off Bailey and a spare key to his house. Bailey, a small husky mix, was adorable and well-behaved, so I figured this would be an easy gig. Alex left me with some simple instructions. Feed her, walk her twice a day, and whatever I did, keep her off the furniture. He said it with a laugh, but I could tell he meant it. That afternoon, I packed a bag, just my laptop, charger, toiletries, and a change of clothes, then headed over to Alex's place. He had a nice house, a bit on the older side but cozy. The kind of place you'd imagine growing up in, with a small front porch and an oak tree that swayed gently in the winter breeze. I'd only been over a handful of times, but it was comfortable and quiet, nestled in a cul-de-sac where nothing much seemed to happen. The day passed without incident. I took Bailey for a walk around the neighborhood, played some video games on Alex's console, and browsed my laptop. By evening, the house felt eerily still. It wasn't creepy per se, but there was something about being in someone else's home alone that always felt a little off. To shake the feeling, I called Trisha, my girlfriend, and invited her over to spend the evening. Alex had said it was fine as long as we kept things low-key. Trisha couldn't come until after her shift at work, so I settled in with Bailey for a quiet evening. I made myself a sandwich, put on a movie, and let Bailey curl up by my feet. Around 9 o'clock, just as the movie was getting to a good part, the doorbell rang. Bailey immediately perked up, her ears twitching as she stared at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I figured maybe a neighbor had come by. When I opened the door, a woman was standing there. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a gray hoodie and holding a jacket. Her hair was dark, tied back loosely, and her expression was calm but slightly impatient. "Hi," she said with a small smile. "I'm Alex's girlfriend. I left something in his room, and I really need to grab it. Is that okay?" The request caught me off guard. Alex had never mentioned a girlfriend to me, and we'd known each other for a couple of years. Still, her demeanor seemed genuine, and she spoke like she knew Alex well. I hesitated, glancing back into the house. "Ah, sure," I said cautiously. "I can grab it for you if you want." She shook her head quickly. "No, that's okay. I know exactly where it is. I won't be long." Reluctantly, I stepped aside and let her in. She moved confidently, heading straight upstairs as if she'd been there 100 times. The whole situation felt strange, but I didn't want to be rude. As I waited downstairs, I pulled out my phone and texted Alex. "Hey, I didn't know you had a girlfriend?" Minutes ticked by, and she still hadn't come back down. Bailey sat by my side, her tail wagging nervously. Finally, the woman descended the stairs, holding the same jacket she'd come in with. "Found it," she said casually. I tried to make small talk. "How long have you and Alex been dating?" She chuckled softly. "Too long," she replied with a cryptic smile, then headed for the door. "Have a good night." And with that, she was gone. Something about the interaction left me uneasy. I checked my phone again, but Alex still hadn't replied. Feeling suspicious, I decided to call him. He answered groggily, clearly already a few drinks deep. "Hey, Alex," I began. "Your girlfriend just stopped by to grab something from your room." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" he said finally, his voice sharp. "A woman showed up. Said she was your girlfriend and needed to grab something. She's been here before, right?" "I don't have a girlfriend," Alex said firmly. "What did she look like?" As I described her, Alex's tone grew increasingly agitated. "Listen," he said, "go upstairs and check my room. Make sure nothing's missing." I raced up the stairs, my heart pounding. His room looked untouched at first glance, but I wasn't familiar enough with his things to know for sure. I reported back to Alex, who let out a string of curses. "I think I know who it was," he muttered. "Make sure she doesn't come back." I wanted to press for details, but Alex sounded rattled, and I decided not to push it. Instead, I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking them twice before settling back in. When Trisha arrived just after midnight, I told her everything. She was as unnerved as I was, and we decided to stick together for the night. Around 12:30 a.m., just as we were starting to relax, Bailey began growling. Her ears were pinned back, and she was staring at the front door. Moments later, there was a soft knock. It wasn't the sharp, confident knock of someone who belonged there. It was hesitant and eerie. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and motioned for Trisha to stay quiet. Whoever was outside knocked again, harder this time. I stared at the door, my breath shallow. "Who is it?" I called out. No answer. I checked the peephole, but saw nothing but darkness. My hands were shaking as I tried calling Alex again, but he didn't pick up. The knocking stopped abruptly. Trisha and I exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. Deciding not to take any chances, we barricaded ourselves in the spare bedroom upstairs, locking the door behind us. Bailey followed us, her tail wagging nervously. About an hour later, just as I was starting to drift off, Bailey's growls woke me up. This time, they were deeper and more urgent. She was at the bedroom door, her body tense. And then we heard its soft footsteps in the hallway. The doorknob rattled. Trisha grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. I forced myself to speak, trying to sound confident. "The cops are already on their way," I shouted. "If you're smart, you'll leave now." There was a pause, followed by a soft, feminine voice on the other side of the door. "Who's in there?" the voice asked sweetly. "This is Alex's house. You shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. Trisha was already dialing 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type. I grabbed a lamp, the closest thing I could find to a weapon, and stood ready to defend us. The voice called out again, this time more insistent. "Alex?" it said. "It's me. Let me in." We stayed silent, and eventually, we heard retreating footsteps. The house fell eerily quiet again, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. By the time they searched the house, the intruder was gone. The front door was wide open, though I knew I had locked it earlier. The officers took our statements and assured us they would patrol the area for the rest of the night. The next morning, Alex cut his trip short and returned home. He looked pale and shaken as he listened to what had happened. Finally, he admitted that he suspected the woman was someone he'd briefly dated a year ago. Things had ended badly, and she'd started showing up unannounced, leaving cryptic notes and even threatening him. He'd thought it was over, but clearly, it wasn't. He changed the locks that day, but the memory of her voice and the way she'd tried to get into the room still haunts me. It wasn't just that she'd come back. It was the way she acted, as if she belonged there, and the unsettling thought that maybe she'd been planning something far worse than we realized. I haven't stayed at Alex's house since. The night was cold, and a light snowfall blanketed the city, muffling the usual bustle of New Year's Eve. My husband and I had just returned from a party, the kind of gathering we attended more out of obligation than enjoyment. My feet throbbed in my high heels, and all I could think about was peeling them off and sinking into bed. The elevator doors opened with a faint ding, and we stepped inside, the metallic walls reflecting our weary faces. My husband pressed the button for the top floor, and the elevator began its smooth ascent. The quiet hum of the machinery was oddly comforting, a brief moment of calm after a long evening. I leaned against the wall, letting out a small sigh of relief. "Almost home," I murmured, glancing at him. He smiled faintly, equally drained. When the elevator chimed again, signaling our arrival, the doors slid open to reveal the familiar hallway of our apartment building. The soft lighting cast long shadows, and the carpeted floor muffled our footsteps as we walked toward our corner suite. Our unit was at the very end of the hallway, a cozy and private space we'd called home for the past 2 years. But tonight, something felt off. As we turned the corner, we both froze. A figure stood in the hallway, her presence stark and jarring against the quiet, empty corridor. It was a woman, or at least it appeared to be. Her long, dark hair was matted and disheveled, hanging in tangled strands that obscured most of her face. She wore a black lace dress, torn and frayed at the edges, as if it had been dragged through mud. Her feet were bare, pale against the dark carpet. She moved slowly, staggering as though she were injured or disoriented. Her hand trailed along the wall, her fingertips brushing against the doors she passed. There was something unnatural about the way she walked, her movements jerky and uneven, like a puppet on invisible strings. My husband and I exchanged uneasy glances. We knew everyone on our floor access to this level was restricted, and it was rare to see anyone unfamiliar. "Do you think she's drunk?" he whispered, his voice low. "Maybe," I replied hesitantly. "Or lost? Should we say something?" Before he could respond, the woman stopped in front of one of our neighbor's doors. She leaned in, her face almost pressing against the peephole. The sight sent a chill down my spine. There was an unsettling deliberateness to her actions, as if she were searching for something or someone. "This is weird," my husband muttered, his brow furrowed. "Let's just keep walking." We moved cautiously, keeping our distance. As we approached our suite, I couldn't help but glance back. The woman had turned her attention to another door, repeating the same eerie gesture. Her head tilted to the side, and a low, guttural hum escaped her lips. It wasn't a tune or a melody, just a sound, deep and primal. My stomach tightened. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound calm. The woman froze. Slowly, she turned her head in our direction, but her body remained facing the door. The motion was unnatural, almost robotic. Her hair parted slightly, revealing a sliver of her face. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were dark, hollow pits that seemed to swallow the dim light of the hallway. I took an involuntary step back, my breath catching in my throat. My husband's hand tightened around mine. "Let's go inside," he said firmly, pulling me toward our door. As we fumbled with the keys, the woman began to move again. This time, She was heading straight for us. Her bare feet made no sound against the carpet, but her presence seemed to fill the hallway, oppressive and suffocating. "Hurry," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. My husband managed to unlock the door, and we slipped inside, slamming it shut behind us. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear her movements. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost polite, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. The door shook under the force of her pounding. "Let me in," she screamed, her voice raw and guttural. It didn't sound human. My husband grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "There's a woman outside our door," he said, his voice tight with fear. "She's acting crazy. We're on the top floor of the building." The operator assured us that officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. The woman's screams continued, interspersed with eerie laughter that sent chills down my spine. I peeked through the peephole, but she wasn't there. The hallway was empty. "She's gone," I whispered, stepping back. My husband shook his head, still clutching the phone. "Wait for the police," he said. "We're not opening that door." Minutes passed in tense silence. When the officers arrived, they searched the entire floor, but found no trace of the woman. "Are you sure she didn't leave through the stairs?" one of them asked. My husband and I both shook our heads. The stairs were on the opposite end of the building. We would have heard her. The officers took our statement and promised to review the security footage in the morning. "If she's a trespasser, we'll figure out how she got in," one of them said. But their reassurances did little to calm my nerves. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak and groan of the building set my heart racing. I kept replaying the image of her face in my mind, those hollow eyes and that twisted grin. Who was she? And what did she want? The next morning, the landlord called. "About last night," he began hesitantly. "We checked the security cameras, but there's nothing on them." "What do you mean, nothing?" my husband asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "The cameras glitched," the landlord explained. "There's no footage from midnight to 1 a.m. It's probably just a technical issue, but it's strange timing, don't you think?" Strange didn't even begin to cover it. Over the next few days, I found myself avoiding the hallway unless absolutely necessary. Every shadow, every distant sound sent a shiver down my spine. We never saw the woman again, but her presence lingered, like a dark cloud that refused to lift. A week later, I ran into Tilly, our elderly neighbor, in the lobby. She greeted me with her usual warmth, but her expression darkened when I mentioned the strange events of New Year's Eve. "You saw her too?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning closer. Tilly glanced around nervously before continuing. "A woman, dressed in black, with long, dark hair. I saw her last year, around the same time. She was standing outside my door, staring through the peephole. I thought it was just my imagination, but now..." She trailed off, her eyes distant and haunted. "Did you ever find out who she was?" I asked. Tilly shook her head. "No. But after that night, I started hearing things. Knocking on my walls, whispers in the middle of the night. It's why I keep the lights on now." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. Was the woman some sort of restless spirit? Or was she something worse? Something beyond comprehension? We moved out of the building a year later. The memories were too unsettling, the questions too many. Even now, every New Year's Eve, I find myself glancing at the hallway of wherever we're staying, half expecting to see her standing there, her hollow eyes fixed on me. Some stories don't have neat endings. They linger like a shadow at the edge of your vision, always there, always watching. And some questions are better left unanswered.